The starship's hull groaned under the stress of another plasma barrage as Kara pressed herself against the cold metal wall. Her azure skin, once a mark of pride among the Zealothi people, now felt like a target painted on her back. The evacuation sirens wailed through the cramped refugee vessel, mixing with the cries of hundreds of displaced beings from across the galaxy. She clutched the small datapad that contained everything she owned: her identity papers, her academic credentials from the University of Zelith Prime, and a single holographic image of her family's estate, now nothing but radioactive ash. The hegemony had declared her entire species enemies of the state after her people had refused to surrender their neural sovereignty to the collective consciousness. Around her, other outcasts huddled in similar desperation. A family of Krellian merchants whose only crime was trading with the wrong systems. A group of Vorthan engineers who had designed ships capable of outrunning hegemony patrols. Even a few hegemony citizens who had spoken out against the regime's increasingly brutal tactics. They all shared the same fate: banishment from civilized space, cast out to drift among the savage outer systems where no law existed except survival. The ship's captain, a grizzled Saurian whose scales had long lost their luster, announced over the intercom that they were approaching the quarantine zone. Beyond this point lay the Forbidden Regions, where primitive species dwelt in ignorance of galactic civilization. The hegemony dumped its unwanted here, knowing that without supplies or support, most would perish within cycles. Kara watched through a small viewport as they passed the warning beacons, their harsh red light painting everything in shades of blood. The other passengers whispered fearfully about what lay ahead. Some spoke of cannibalistic species that hunted refugees for sport. Others told of worlds so hostile that the very atmosphere would melt flesh from bone. But Kara noticed something odd in the ship's trajectory. Instead of dumping them on some random hell world, as was standard procedure, their vessels seemed to be following a specific course. She accessed her datapad and cross-referenced their heading with old star charts she had downloaded from the university archives. Her heart skipped a beat when she identified their destination: a small blue world in a system marked with the highest level of quarantine warnings. Earth. The planet's name was spoken in whispers among xenobiologists, a world so dangerous that even automated probes were forbidden from approaching it. The inhabitants, according to classified reports she had once glimpsed, were a species of unprecedented violence and cunning. They had nearly destroyed themselves with nuclear weapons, polluted their atmosphere with industrial toxins, and engaged in constant warfare. If the reports were true, humans were the galaxy's nightmare made flesh. The ship shuddered as it entered Earth's outer system, passing a belt of asteroids and several gas giants. Karen noticed other refugees beginning to panic as they too realized where they were being taken. A Krellian mother held her cubs close, singing a funeral dirge. The Vorthan engineers frantically tried to access the ship's systems, hoping to change course, but the controls had been locked by hegemony override codes. As Earth grew larger in the viewports, Kara's enhanced vision picked up details that made her question everything she had heard. The planet wasn't the polluted wasteland described in the reports. Vast blue oceans sparkled in the sunlight, and continents of green and brown suggested thriving ecosystems. More surprisingly, she detected an extensive network of satellites and space stations orbiting the world, far more advanced than the primitive technology suggested by hegemony intelligence. The refugee ship's communications array crackled to life, and a transmission in an unknown language filled the cargo hold. The universal translator struggled for a moment before rendering the words in galactic standard. Unidentified vessel, this is Earth Defense Command. We have you on our screens. Are you in distress? Please respond. The Saurian captain, following hegemony protocol for dumping refugees, remained silent. But the humans persisted. We're reading multiple life signs aboard your vessel. Your engine signature suggests critical damage. We're dispatching rescue shuttles to assist. Please maintain your current heading. Confusion rippled through the refugees. Rescue shuttles? From the violent primitives of Earth? It had to be a trap. Several passengers began praying to their various deities, preparing for death. But Kara felt something different, a spark of hope she hadn't experienced since fleeing her homeworld. She pushed through the crowd to the communication console and, before anyone could stop her, activated the transmitter. Earth Defense Command, this is Refugee Vessel Sanctuary's end. We are carrying 832 displaced persons from 17 different species. We have been banished by the Galactic Hegemony and left to die. We need help. The response came immediately, warm and reassuring. Sanctuary's end. Message received. Help is on the way. We're transmitting approach vectors to our orbital refugee processing station. You're safe now. Through the viewports, Kara watched as sleek vessels emerged from Earth's atmosphere, their design unlike anything in the hegemony's fleets. They moved with a grace that suggested advanced propulsion systems, and their hulls bore a symbol she didn't recognize, a blue circle filled with unfamiliar continents, surrounded by golden leaves. The lead shuttle's pilot spoke again, and this time the translator recognized the warmth in the voice. Sanctuary's end. This is Captain Sarah Chun of the United Earth Rescue Corps. We're going to bring you folks home. Home! The word hit Kara like a physical force. She had no home anymore. None of them did. But as the human shuttles docked with their battered vessel and airlock seals hissed open, she saw something that challenged every prejudice the hegemony had taught about humans. The rescue team that entered wasn't the squad of savage warriors she expected. They were medics, engineers, and social workers carrying supplies and wearing expressions of genuine concern. A human woman with dark skin and kind eyes approached Kara directly, somehow recognizing her distress. "I'm Dr. Amara Johnson," she said, her voice gentle despite speaking through a translator. "You're safe now. We're going to take care of all of you." "What?" Kara asked, unable to hide her suspicion. "We're nothing to you. Different species, banished criminals according to the hegemony. Why would you help us?" Dr. Johnson smiled, and in that expression, Kara saw something the hegemony had tried to stamp out of the galaxy: simple compassion. Because 100 years ago, we were the refugees. We nearly destroyed our own world. And in our darkest hour, we learned the most important lesson any species can learn. We're all in this together. As the humans began evacuating the refugees, treating injuries, and distributing food, Kara overheard fragments of conversation that painted a picture very different from hegemony propaganda. Earth had indeed gone through a violent phase, but they had emerged from it transformed. Their near extinction had taught them the value of unity, cooperation, and, most importantly, the strength that came from diversity. The orbital station they were taken to was a marvel of engineering, clearly incorporating technologies from multiple species. Kara learned that Earth had been secretly harboring refugees for decades, reverse engineering abandoned hegemony tech, and improving upon it. They had built a civilization that welcomed the unwanted, protecting them from the regime that had cast them out. As her fellow refugees were processed, medical treatment for the sick, food for the hungry, translators for those who needed them, Kara found herself in conversation with Captain Chun, who was overseeing the operation. "The hegemony thinks we're primitives," Chun explained, "and we've been careful to maintain that illusion. Let them think we're just another quarantined world full of violent savages. Meanwhile, we've been building something here, a coalition of the banished, the rejected, the free." "But why maintain the deception?" Kara asked. "Your technology clearly rivals theirs. You could challenge them." Chen's expression grew serious. "Not yet. Every refugee ship they send us makes us stronger. Every brilliant mind they exile, every brave soul who refused to bow to their control, becomes part of Earth's growing alliance. The hegemony is creating its own downfall, one banished person at a time." As the days passed in the refugee center, Kara was amazed by Earth's society. Humans lived alongside dozens of alien species in harmony. Former hegemony engineers worked with human scientists to develop new technologies. Artists from across the galaxy collaborated to create beauty that transcended species boundaries. It wasn't perfect, no society was, but it was free in a way the hegemony could never be. She was assigned a counselor, a soft-spoken human named Marcus who helped her process her trauma and plan for a future. To her surprise, Earth government was eager to utilize her xenobiology expertise. They had been secretly documenting and protecting species throughout the galaxy, preparing for a future where the hegemony's stranglehold could be broken. Every species has something unique to contribute, Marcus explained during one of their sessions. Your understanding of zealothy biology could help us develop medical treatments, agricultural techniques, even new approaches to bioengineering. Earth doesn't just take in refugees, we invest in them. The refugee center was a temporary home, but a comfortable one. The humans had learned from each species they harbored, creating environments that could accommodate wildly different physiologies. Kara's quarters could simulate Zelith Prime's dual sun cycles and higher humidity. The food synthesizers have been programmed with cuisine from hundreds of worlds. Even entertainment systems included cultural archives salvaged from civilizations the hegemony had destroyed. But it was the small gestures that affected Kara most deeply. A human child in the center's education facility who asked to learn about Zealothy poetry. A team of human engineers who spent their free time helping a Vorthan family repair a damaged cultural artifact. The memorial wall, where refugees could honor their lost homeworlds, tended carefully by human caretakers who understood the weight of such loss. 3 weeks after her arrival, Kara stood in the observation deck of Earth's primary orbital habitat, looking down at the blue world below. Beside her, other recent arrivals marveled at their new home. The Krellian mother she had seen on the ship was laughing as her cubs played with human children in the zero-gravity recreation area. The Vorthan engineers were excitedly discussing collaboration opportunities with Earth's Technology Council. Captain Shin found her there, joining her at the viewport. "Second thoughts?" the human asked. "No," Kara replied, surprising herself with the firmness of her answer. "I'm just thinking about the irony. The hegemony banished us to what they thought was certain death, but instead they gave us freedom. They sent us to the one place in the galaxy that would welcome us without conditions." Shin nodded. Earth has a saying, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." It's from an old poem written at a time when we were still learning what it meant to be truly civilized. Now we live those words. What happens next? Kara asked. We can't hide forever. The hegemony grows stronger every cycle. But so do we, Chun countered. Every scientist they exile advances our technology. Every soldier they discharge trains our defenders. Every free thinker they banish adds to our council. They're so focused on purity and control that they don't realize they're hemorrhaging their greatest resource, diversity of thought. Kara considered this. On Zelith Prime, she had been just another xenobiologist, her research constrained by hegemony regulations. Here, she was being offered resources and freedom to pursue studies that could help countless species. The humans hadn't just given her refuge, they had given her purpose. A soft chime indicated the end of the center's orientation period. Those who wished could now move to permanent settlements across Earth or its growing colony network. Some would choose to live in the gleaming cities where humans and aliens work side by side. Others would join the agricultural communes that were pioneering sustainable farming techniques. A few would even volunteer for the defense forces, training to protect their new home from hegemony scouts. Kara had already made her choice. She would join the Xenological Research Institute in what the humans called California, working alongside scientists from 30 different species to catalog and preserve genetic diversity from across the galaxy. It was work the hegemony would never permit, but work that might someday help restore worlds they had destroyed. As she prepared to leave the observation deck, one last thought struck her. She turned to Chun with a question that had been nagging at her. Your world's name, Earth. In our language, it translates to soil or ground. Such a simple name for a world that's become so important. Why not change it to something grander? Shin smiled, because it reminds us where we came from. We're all made of Earth, in the end. Humans, Zealothi, Krellians, we're all children of soil and starlight. The hegemony forgot that, but we never will. That night, as Kara settled into her new quarters at the Research Institute, she activated her datapad and began recording a message. Not to transmit, that was still too dangerous, but to preserve. Someday, when the hegemony fell and the galaxy was free, she wanted there to be a record of this moment. My name is Kara Velsurin, formerly of Zelith Prime, now of Earth, she began. I was banished across the galaxy for the crime of refusing to surrender my mind to the collective. I expected to die among strangers in the dark between stars. Instead, I found something the hegemony fears more than any weapon. I found hope. She paused, looking out her window at the lights of the city beyond, where humans and aliens lived and worked and dreamed together. The hegemony believes that unity comes from conformity, that strength comes from sameness. But Earth has shown me the truth. Real unity comes from diversity embraced. Real strength comes from different minds working toward common goals. They banished us to die, but instead they sent us to the one place in the galaxy where we could truly live. As she continued her recording, documenting everything she had seen and learned, Kara felt the fear and despair that had haunted her since leaving Zelith Prime finally begin to fade. The hegemony had taken her world, her family, her entire life. But in trying to destroy her, they had given her something far more valuable. They had given her Earth, and Earth had given her hope. The massive colony ship New Horizon dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, its hull scarred by weapons fire and radiation burns. Unlike the smaller refugee vessels that usually limped into Earth space, this ship carried over 10,000 souls, the entire surviving population of Kepler Station, one of the hegemony's own research outposts. Kara Velsorin watched the arrival from her laboratory at the Xenological Research Institute. 3 years had passed since her own banishment, and she had become one of Earth's leading experts on refugee integration. When the emergency alert came through, she immediately volunteered to join the response team. The story that emerged from the colony ship's survivors shocked even Earth's experienced refugee coordinators. Kepler Station hadn't been destroyed by external enemies or natural disaster. The hegemony itself had ordered its liquidation when the station's researchers had made a discovery that threatened the regime's control. Evidence that the collective consciousness they forced upon member species was actually parasitic, slowly draining individual creativity and eventual causing neural decay. Dr. Yanis Thorne, the station's former director and a pure-blood hegemony citizen, sat across from Kara in the debriefing room, his forearms trembling with exhaustion. "We tried to suppress the findings," he admitted, his voice hollow. "We knew what would happen if we reported them. But one of my researchers, she couldn't stand by and watch billions suffer. She tried to transmit our data to the medical council. They came within hours," Thorne continued. "Liquidation squads. Orders to eliminate everyone who had seen the research. Not just the scientists, the support staff, their families, even the children in the station's education center." His primary eyes closed in grief. "We barely managed to evacuate a third of our people before the plasma bombs fell." Kara documented his testimony, while part of her mind raced with the implications. This wasn't just another group of political dissidents or cultural preservationists. These were hegemony citizens, many from the core worlds, who had chosen exile over compliance with genocide. The integration of 10,000 new refugees pushed Earth's resources to their limits. The orbital stations overflowed, and for the first time, large numbers had to be housed on the planet's surface immediately. Kara watched in amazement as humanity's true character revealed itself in the crisis. Cities across Earth opened their doors. New Tokyo converted entire districts into temporary housing. The African Federation repurposed military bases into refugee centers. The Americas Coalition mobilized its agricultural reserves to feed the influx. But most remarkably, Earth's existing alien population stepped forward en masse to help their fellow exiles. Kara found herself assigned as liaison to a group of hegemony military defectors, soldiers who had refused orders to fire on the evacuation ships. Their leader, Commander Zex Altran, was a decorated veteran who had once hunted refugees for the regime. "I've spent half my life enforcing their laws," Altran told her during their first meeting, his cybernetic implants still bearing hegemony military codes. "I've dragged families from their homes, separated children from parents, delivered dissidents to reconditioning centers. I told myself it was for the greater good, for galactic stability." He gestured to the view outside, where human and alien children played together in a park. "But this is stability. This is the greater good. Not the hegemony's forced unity, but chosen cooperation. I've seen what Earth is building, Dr. Velsoren. It's what we were taught to fear most. A society where differences are strength." The commander's transformation from enforcer to protector became one of many such stories. Earth's military advisors, many of them former refugees themselves, worked to retrain the hegemony defectors. Not to forget their skills, but to repurpose them. Soldiers became peacekeepers. Intelligence officers became cultural facilitators. Military engineers became builders of homes instead of destroyers of worlds. But the massive influx also brought dangers. Kara was called to an emergency meeting when intelligence reported that hegemony infiltrators had likely boarded the colony's ship, hidden among the genuine refugees. Earth's leadership faced its first real test since beginning the refugee program decades ago. President Chun, the former rescue captain who had risen to Earth's highest office, convened the Security Council. Kara watched as humans and aliens debated fiercely about how to respond. Some urged aggressive screening, even deportation of suspicious individuals. Others warned that paranoia would destroy everything Earth had built. It was an elder Krellian philosopher, one of the first refugees Earth had taken in 50 years ago, who provided the solution. "We cannot become them," she said simply. "The moment we let fear drive us to persecution, we lose. Screen, yes. Be watchful, certainly. But judge by actions, not by origins." The screening process that followed was thorough but humane. Advanced technology, much of it developed by refugee scientists, could detect hegemony neural implants and behavioral conditioning. But instead of imprisonment or exile, those identified as potential threats were offered something unprecedented: rehabilitation. Dr. Thorne himself volunteered to undergo the process first, submitting to neural scans that revealed extensive hegemony conditioning despite his conscious rejection of their methods. Earth's therapeutic teams, combining human psychology with alien neuroscience, began the delicate work of helping former hegemony citizens reclaim their individual minds. Kara participated in many of these sessions, using her xenobiology expertise to understand how different species responded to conditioning and recovery. What she discovered both horrified and inspired her. The hegemony's control went deeper than anyone had realized, creating neural pathways that enforce conformity at the cellular level. But the refugee mind, exposed to Earth's diversity and freedom, showed remarkable plasticity in overcoming this programming. One patient, a former hegemony educator, broke down during treatment as suppressed memories surfaced. "I taught children to report their parents for wrong thinking," she sobbed. "I was so proud of my compliance ratings. How did I become that person?" "You were made into that person," Kara reminded her gently. "But you're choosing to become someone else now. That's what Earth offers, the chance to choose." The rehabilitation program's success had an unexpected consequence. Word somehow reached the hegemony that their former citizens were not being executed or imprisoned but healed. The regime's response was swift and furious. They declared Earth a contamination zone, threatening any vessel that approached it with immediate destruction. They even positioned automated defense platforms at the edge of the quarantine zone. But their blockade had a fatal flaw. It was designed to keep people out, not in. Earth's growing fleet, built with technologies from 100 different species and improved by human innovation, found ways to slip through. Small, stealthy vessels began conducting rescue operations deep in hegemony space, evacuating those who sought freedom. Kara joined one of these missions, wanting to understand the conditions that created refugees. The ship, commanded by Captain Marcus Chun, the president's son, was crewed by an impossible mix of species that the hegemony claimed could never cooperate. Their target was a labor world where political prisoners mined radioactive materials for the hegemony war machine. The approach required threading through patrol routes that Commander Altran knew from his enforcement days, using stealth technology developed by Vorthan engineers, and coordinating with underground resistance cells that included Kara's own contacts from Zelith Prime's survivor network. The mining world's conditions exceeded Kara's worst expectations. Prisoners of dozens of species worked in lethal radiation, their life expectancy measured in months. Guards used neural punishment devices that caused agony without leaving marks. Families were separated and used as leverage against each other. But even here in this hell created by the hegemony's need for resources and control, Kara found something remarkable: solidarity among the prisoners. Different species had learned each other's languages, shared meager rations, and created secret support networks. When Earth's rescue team made contact, the prisoners had already organized themselves for evacuation. The escape was harrowing. Hegemony forces responded faster than expected, and the rescue ship had to fight its way out. Kara found herself manning a medical station, treating injuries from neural whips and radiation exposure while the ship shook from plasma fire. But they made it out with 300 souls who had been written off as dead by their own governments. As the ship headed back to Earth, Kara moved among the rescued, documenting their stories and providing what comfort she could. One young Zealothi, barely past adolescence, grabbed her arm. "You're Dr. Velsoren," he whispered. "My parents spoke of you. They said you died a traitor." "I lived free," Kara corrected gently. "And now so will you." The mission's success inspired others. Earth's rescue fleet grew, aided by an underground railroad of sympathizers throughout hegemony space. Station workers who looked the other way when ships passed through. Communication officers who delayed reporting anomalies. Even some hegemony officials who had begun to question the regime, but couldn't openly rebel. Back on Earth, the rescued prisoners required extensive medical treatment. The radiation exposure had damaged many at the genetic level. But Earth's medical facilities, combining healing techniques from across the galaxy, achieved recoveries that hegemony science deemed impossible. Kara worked with the rehabilitation teams, helping survivors process not just their physical trauma, but the psychological scars of enslavement. Many struggled with survivors' guilt, knowing friends and family remained in bondage. Others grappled with identities shaped entirely by oppression, unsure who they were without chains. The answer, as always on Earth, was choice and time. Former miners became artists, discovering creativity they never knew they possessed. Others joined Earth's agricultural programs, finding healing in nurturing life after so much death. Some even volunteered for the rescue missions, determined to free others as they had been freed. But the hegemony's response to Earth's growing boldness escalated beyond blockades and threats. Intelligence networks reported massive military buildups, new weapons designed specifically to counter Earth's diverse technologies, and, most ominously, attempt to create a virus that would target the neural rehabilitation process. President Chun called a global assembly, not just of humans, but of every species that had found refuge on Earth. In the Great Hall of the United Earth Congress, beings who the hegemony insisted could never coexist stood together as one people. "They're coming for us," Chun said simply. "Not today, perhaps not this year, but soon. The hegemony cannot tolerate our existence, because we proved their entire philosophy wrong. Every free mind among us, every friendship across species lines, every innovation born from diversity, we are their antithesis." The assembly faced a choice that would define Earth's future. They could remain hidden, continuing small-scale rescues, while hoping the hegemony would eventually ignore them. Or they could prepare for war, not of conquest, but of liberation. Speaker after speaker rose. Refugees who had become citizens, soldiers who had become protectors, scientists who had found freedom to pursue truth. The debate was passionate, but respectful, a demonstration of democracy that the hegemony's ruling council could never comprehend. It was Commander Altran who perhaps spoke most powerfully. "I know the hegemony's strength," he said. "I helped build it, but I also know its weakness. They rule through fear, conformity, and the suppression of individual will. We exist through hope, diversity, and the celebration of every voice. In any battle between such forces, history shows which prevails." When a vote came, it was unanimous. Earth would continue its rescue operations, but it would also prepare, not just for defense, but for the day when the quarantine zone would become a liberation front. Kara returned to her laboratory with a new mission. The Xenological Research Institute would now focus on developing defenses against hegemony bioweapons, treatments for their neural conditioning, and technologies that could protect the diversity Earth had cultivated. As she worked late into the night, analyzing genetic samples and neural patterns, Kara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The hegemony had banished her as a criminal, but Earth had welcomed her as a scientist. They had tried to silence her voice, but Earth had amplified it. Through her laboratory window, she could see the lights of the city, human and alien, refugee and native, all building something together that the hegemony insisted was impossible. The regime had created Earth as a dumping ground for its unwanted, never realizing they were planting the seeds of their own transformation. The war, when it came, would not be like the conflicts that had shaped galactic history. It would not be fought just with weapons and fleets, though Earth was building both. It would be fought with ideas, the radical notion that strength came from differences, that unity didn't require uniformity, that freedom was not a threat to order, but its highest expression. And at the center of it all was a small blue world that had learned from its own violent past, opened its arms to the banished, and in doing so, had become the hope of a galaxy yearning to breathe free. Commander Zex Altran stood on the bridge of Earth's flagship, Diversity's Dawn, watching the tactical displays with a mixture of anticipation and dread. 5 years had passed since his defection, and the moment Earth's leadership had long prepared for was finally at hand. The hegemony's third fleet, over 1,000 vessels strong, was moving toward the quarantine zone. "All stations report ready," announced Captain Sarah Chun, who had taken command of Earth's united fleet. Beside her stood representatives from every species that called Earth home, a command structure that would have been impossible under hegemony doctrine. Kara Velsorin worked frantically in the fleet's science vessel, monitoring the bioneural weapons the hegemony had deployed at their vanguard. Her team, a mix of xenobiologists from 17 different species, had spent years developing countermeasures. Now, they would discover if their work had been enough. Their broadcasting demands for unconditional surrender, reported the communications officer, a young human whose parents had been among Earth's first alien refugees. "They're calling us a contamination that must be cleansed for galactic purity." President Marcus Chun, who had chosen to lead from the front lines despite parliamentary objections, activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All personnel, this is your president. The hegemony comes to destroy us not because we are weak, but because we are strong. They fear what we represent. Proof that their way is not the only way. Today we don't fight just for Earth, but for every being who dreams of freedom." The first phase of Earth's defense surprised the hegemony commanders. Instead of meeting them at the quarantine zone's edge, Earth's fleet had pulled back, leaving only automated beacons that broadcast messages in every known language. "All who seek freedom are welcome here. Lay down your arms and live in peace." Admiral Kron, commanding the hegemony fleet, laughed at what he perceived as weakness. He ordered his forces forward, confident in their numerical superiority and unified command structure. They passed the abandoned defense platforms, weapons charged and ready for Earth's primitive resistance. But Earth's true first line of defense wasn't weapons, it was words. As the hegemony fleet advanced, their communication systems were flooded with transmissions. Not jamming signals or cyber attacks, but messages, personal testimonies from former hegemony citizens who had found freedom on Earth, videos of their species living in harmony, children of former enemies playing together, scientists from rival civilizations collaborating on breakthrough discoveries. Shut down those transmissions, Admiral Kron ordered, but his communications officers struggled to comply. The messages came on every frequency, in every format, adapted specifically for each species' neural receptors. Even more disturbing, some of his bridge crew had stopped working, transfixed by images of their own species living free from the collective consciousness. Then came Earth's second surprise. Hidden throughout the asteroid belt, thousands of small transmitters activated. Each one broadcast the research findings from Kepler's station. The proof that the hegemony's neural collective was parasitic, slowly killing the minds it claimed to unite. The data was accompanied by testimony from Dr. Yanis Thorne and his team, hegemony scientists whose credentials were unimpeachable. Chaos erupted on several hegemony vessels. Crews who had been experiencing the symptoms described in the research, memory loss, creativity drain, emotional numbness, suddenly understood their cause. On a battlecruiser crewed primarily by Vorthans, the entire engineering section refused orders, demanding to know why this information had been hidden. But Admiral Kron maintained control through fear and conditioning. He ordered the execution of any crew member who questioned orders, and his fleet pressed forward. They emerged from the asteroid belt to find Earth's forces arranged in a defensive formation around the planet. A mere 300 ships against his 1,000. Pathetic, Kron muttered. All units, prepare for synchronized bombardment. We'll turn their contaminated world to glass. It was then that Earth revealed its true strength. The 300 ships in defensive formation were just the visible force. From behind Earth's moon, from within the atmospheres of Jupiter and Saturn, from camouflage positions throughout the system, ships emerged. Not hundreds, but thousands. But these weren't just Earth vessels. They bore the markings of 100 different civilizations. Refugees who had become citizens. Scientists who had become warriors. Artists who had become strategists. The hegemony had spent decades exiling its best and brightest to Earth, and now they returned as a united force. The battle that followed overturned every principle of hegemony military doctrine. Their unified command structure, so effective against traditional enemies, struggled against Earth's coordinated diversity. Each squadron fought with tactics adapted from their species' unique strengths. Krellian pilots used their multidimensional vision to execute maneuvers hegemony training considered impossible. Vorthan engineers had modified weapons to exploit weaknesses in hegemony shields they had designed. Zealoty scientists like Kara deployed bioneural countermeasures that turned the enemy's conditioning against them. Commander Altran led a strike force of former hegemony soldiers who knew every protocol, every weakness, every blind spot in their former military's tactics. His squadron's surgical strikes on command vessels created confusion in the rigid hierarchy, forcing junior officers to make decisions they had never been trained for. But the true turning point came from an unexpected source. Throughout the hegemony fleet, crew members who had been exposed to Earth's messages began to experience something their conditioning had suppressed out. A weapons officer hesitated before firing on a ship broadcasting in his native language. A navigator accidentally on purpose miscalculated an attack vector. An engineer discovered sudden maintenance issues that took weapons offline. Admiral Kron watched his perfect military machine begin to falter. Traitors, he screamed. Neural discipline protocols, all vessels. But the neural discipline that had once ensured obedience now became a liability. Crew members subjected to punishment for questioning orders didn't become more compliant. They became more desperate. On a dozen ships, full-scale mutinies erupted. Former enemies of the hegemony found unexpected allies among its own forces. Captain Chun seized the moment. To all hegemony personnel, you don't have to die for their lies. Power down your weapons, and you'll not be harmed. Earth offers asylum to all who seek it. The offer spread through the hegemony fleet like wildfire. Individual ships began breaking formation, some powering down weapons, others actively turning on their former comrades. Admiral Kron's flagship found itself isolated as more vessels defected or simply refused to fight. In the science vessel, Kara's team achieved a breakthrough. They had decoded the hegemony's neural virus and developed not just a defense but a reversal, transmitting the cure through the same channels the hegemony used for discipline. They began freeing minds in real time. "It's working," her assistant reported. "Neural liberation is cascading through their network. Every mind we free can help free others." The battle turned into a rout, but not the kind Admiral Kron had anticipated. His own bridge crew began showing signs of independent thought, questioning orders they would have followed blindly hours before. His tactical officer, a Saurian who had served loyally for decades, suddenly asked, "Admiral, why are we doing this? These people offer us freedom, not subjugation." Kron's response was to draw his sidearm and execute the officer, but this act of desperation only accelerated the breakdown. His remaining bridge crew turned on him, and within minutes, the feared admiral of the Third Fleet was in restraints, screaming about contamination and purity to officers who were no longer listening. The surrender, when it came, was not a formal ceremony, but a gradual awakening. Ship after ship powered down weapons and requested asylum. Earth's expanded fleet moved to assist, providing medical aid, food, and, most importantly, the neural treatments that would free them from the collective's grip. But President Chin knew this victory was only the beginning. In an emergency session of Earth's Congress, he addressed not just humanity, but the galaxy. The transmission was sent on all channels, reaching beyond the quarantine zone to every corner of hegemony space. To all beings who hear this message, the hegemony told you Earth was a prison, a place of exile and death. But we have become something else. We are proof that diversity is not weakness, but strength. That freedom is not chaos, but choice. Today, we didn't defeat the hegemony's fleet. We liberated it. And we stand ready to liberate any who wish to join us. The response was immediate and overwhelming. On worlds throughout hegemony space, populations who had seen Earth's victory began to rise. Not in violent revolution, but in quiet refusal. Workers walked away from factories. Soldiers laid down arms. Citizens removed neural implants. The hegemony's leadership, safe in their core worlds, declared martial law and prepared for total war. But they faced a problem their philosophy couldn't solve. Their entire system depended on willing participation in the collective. As more minds broke free, the neural network itself began to destabilize. On Earth, the integration of thousands of former hegemony military personnel tested resources once again. But the systems developed over years of refugee acceptance adapted. Former admirals worked alongside ensigns they had once commanded. Species that had been trained to hate each other shared quarters and slowly learned trust. Kara found herself treating Admiral Kron himself, the architect of so much suffering, now reduced to a broken figure struggling to understand individual thought after decades in the collective. His deprogramming was difficult. His neural pathways had been shaped by the collective for so long that independent thought caused him physical pain. "Why show me mercy?" he asked during one session, genuine confusion in his voice. "I would have destroyed your world without hesitation." "Because that's what makes us different," Kara replied. "The hegemony believes in perfection through uniformity. We believe in growth through diversity. Even someone like you can change, can contribute, can become more than what they were made to be." The Admiral's rehabilitation became a symbol of Earth's approach. Videos of his transformation, from genocidal enforcer to someone learning to think for himself, spread throughout the galaxy. If someone like Kron could change, anyone could. Meanwhile, Earth's fleet now swollen with defectors and volunteers, began what President Chun called Operation Open Arms. They didn't invade hegemony space. They simply made themselves available at the borders. Any ship, any station, any world that wanted to leave the collective was offered safe passage and protection. The hegemony's response was to tighten control, increasing neural discipline, and deploying ever harsher measures against dissent. But each crackdown only created more refugees, more defectors, more proof that their system was failing. Commander Altran, now Admiral of Earth's Liberation Fleet, led increasingly bold missions. They evacuated entire colonies before hegemony punishment forces could arrive. They distributed neural liberation technology through underground networks. They protected convoys of refugees, making the dangerous journey to freedom. One mission particularly stood out: the hegemony's primary neural conditioning facility, where young beings were first inducted into the collective, sent a secret distress signal. The staff, having seen the truth about what they were doing to children, wanted to defect, with all 20,000 young beings in their care. The evacuation required Earth's entire fleet and lasted 3 harrowing days. Hegemony forces attacked relentlessly, but Earth's defenders held the line. When the last transport cleared the facility, carrying children who would grow up free from neural conditioning, even hardened soldiers wept. Those children, representing dozens of species, became known as the Freedom Generation. Raised on Earth with access to their full cultural heritage and individual potential, they would grow to be artists, scientists, leaders, everything the collective would have stripped from them. As the war continued, it became less about territory and more about ideas. Worlds didn't fall to Earth's military might. They chose to leave the hegemony's influence. The collective consciousness, deprived of the diversity it had paradoxically depended on while suppressing, began to collapse in on itself. In a desperate final gambit, the hegemony's High Council ordered the deployment of Omega weapons, devices that would sterilize entire systems rather than let them fall to contamination. But when the order came, they discovered that their most loyal admirals, their most dedicated soldiers, their most committed citizens had already left for Earth. The weapons were never fired. The operators, freed from neural conditioning by Earth's broadcast treatments, simply walked away from their posts. The High Council found themselves alone in their pristine chambers, still connected to a collective that now consisted only of themselves, a perfect unity of minds that had no one left to control. The formal end of the hegemony came not with a bang, but with a whimper. The last High Counselor, experiencing individual thought for the first time in centuries, sent a simple message to Earth: "We surrender. Please help us remember who we were before we forgot ourselves." Earth's response was what it had always been: open arms. Medical teams, counselors, and educators flooded former hegemony worlds. The work of rebuilding, of helping billions remember individual thought and cultural identity, would take generations. But it was work Earth's diverse population was uniquely equipped to handle. Kara stood in her laboratory, now expanded to a facility that covered several city blocks. Her team, which had started with a handful of refugee scientists, now numbered in the thousands. They were developing treatments for species-specific neural damage, preserving cultural knowledge the hegemony had tried to erase, and, most importantly, teaching former collective members how to think for themselves again. A alert chimed on her console: another ship of refugees approaching Earth's orbit. But the term refugee had evolved. These weren't the desperate, banished souls of years past. These were beings choosing freedom, choosing diversity, choosing to join something greater than the sum of its parts. Through her window, she could see the integration center where the new arrivals would be processed. The Krellian mother she had met on her own refugee ship now worked there, her cubs grown and serving as cultural liaisons. The Vorthan engineers had designed the facility to accommodate any physiology. Former hegemony soldiers stood guard, not to imprison, but to protect those taking their first steps toward freedom. President Chun, in his final address before stepping down, had said it best: The hegemony feared Earth because we proved their greatest lie, that unity requires uniformity, that strength comes from sameness. But look around you. Look at what we've built. Humans and aliens, refugees and natives, former enemies and new friends. We are unity in diversity. We are strength in difference. We are what happens when you open your arms to the banished and discover they were never criminals. They were just free. The galaxy was healing, not returning to what it was before the hegemony, but becoming something new. Trade routes connected worlds that had been isolated. Scientific collaboration produced breakthroughs impossible under rigid control. Art and culture flourished in ways the collective consciousness could never have permitted. And at the center of it all remained Earth. Not as a ruler or conqueror, but as an example. The small blue world that had nearly destroyed itself, learned from its mistakes, and opened its arms to the universe's unwanted. In doing so, it had saved not just the refugees who came to its shores, but the entire galaxy from the sterile perfection of forced unity. Standing in her laboratory, preparing to mentor another group of former collective members in individual thinking, Kara allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The frightened refugee who had arrived on Earth years ago was gone, replaced by someone who had helped liberate billions. The hegemony had banished her across the galaxy, expecting her to die alone and forgotten. Instead, Earth had opened its arms, and in that simple act of compassion, the seeds of the galaxy's transformation had been planted. The revolution hadn't been won with weapons or conquest, but with something far more powerful. The radical idea that everyone, regardless of species or origin, deserved to think, dream, and live free. The banished had become the liberators. The contaminated had become a cure. And Earth, the forbidden world at the edge of civilized space, had become the heart of a new galactic civilization built on the simplest and most powerful principle of all. Everyone is welcome here. 10 years had passed since the fall of the hegemony, and the galaxy had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. Where once stood the rigid structures of collective consciousness, now flourished a vibrant network of independent worlds bound not by neural chains, but by chosen cooperation. At the heart of this new order stood Earth, no longer a quarantine prison, but a shining beacon of what was possible when diversity was embraced rather than feared. Kara Velsurin, now director of the Galactic Cultural Preservation Initiative, stood before the newly completed memorial of the banished. The crystalline structure rose from Earth's capital, each facet containing the story of a species the hegemony had tried to erase. Millions of names were etched in light, refugees who had fled to Earth and, in turn, helped save the galaxy. "Ready for the ceremony?" asked a familiar voice. She turned to see Admiral Altran, his military uniform replaced by the simple robes of an educator. After the war, he had founded the Academy of Individual Thought, helping former collective members rediscover their capacity for independent decision-making. "As ready as one can be for something like this," Kara replied, looking at the gathering crowd. Beings of every known species had come for the dedication. Former refugees, their descendants, hegemony defectors, and those who had been liberated when the collective fell. President Sarah Chun, the same woman who had rescued Kara's refugee ship so many years ago, approached the memorial's dedication platform. Age had touched her features, but her eyes still held the warmth that had welcomed countless lost souls to Earth. "Citizens of the free galaxy," she began, her voice carrying across the plaza through advanced translation systems that preserved not just words but emotional nuance. "We gather today not to celebrate victory, but to remember a journey. Each name on this memorial represents someone who was told they didn't belong, that their thoughts were wrong, that their very existence was a contamination." She paused, letting her words sink in. But Earth knew better. We had learned from our own dark history that diversity isn't a weakness to be purged. It's the very source of strength. Every refugee who came to our world brought unique perspectives, irreplaceable knowledge, and invaluable experiences. Together, we didn't just survive the hegemony's attempts to destroy us. We showed the galaxy a better way. The ceremony included representatives from every major species, each adding their own cultural elements. Zealothi singers performed harmonies that had been forbidden under collective rule. Krellian artists created floating light sculptures that told stories of exile and homecoming. Vorthan engineers demonstrated technologies that combined the best of every civilization, innovations impossible under the hegemony's rigid control. But perhaps the most moving moment came when a group of children took the stage. They were the Freedom Generation, those rescued from conditioning facilities during the war. Now, teenagers, they had grown up experiencing something previous generations could barely imagine: true choice in who they wanted to become. One young Saurian stepped forward. "My name is Lysander Kron," he announced, and a ripple went through the crowd. Everyone knew that surname. His father had been the admiral who led the hegemony's assault on Earth. My father was shaped by the collective to be a weapon. But Earth showed him he could be more. Today, I stand here not as the child of a war criminal, but as proof that we are not bound by the chains of our past. The young beings performed a piece they had created together, a fusion of dance, music, and visual art that drew from their various heritages while creating something entirely new. It was chaotic by hegemony standards, with no unified theme or rigid structure. But in that chaos was beauty, creativity, and above all, freedom. After the ceremony, Kara found herself in the Memorial's Archive Center, where the full stories of the Banished were preserved. She stopped at her own entry, a holographic recording she had made years ago, documenting her escape from Zealoth Prime. Beside it were thousands of similar stories. Families torn apart by ideology, scientists punished for curiosity, artists silenced for creativity. It's overwhelming, isn't it? Admiral Kron, Lysander's father, stood beside her. The years of therapy and rehabilitation showed in his bearing. Where once stood a rigid enforcer of conformity, now was a man who had learned to think for himself, to see all the lives the hegemony destroyed, and to know I was part of it. But you're also part of this, Kara reminded him, gesturing to the bustling plaza outside where former enemies mingled as friends. Redemption isn't about forgetting the past. It's about choosing a different future. Kron nodded slowly. My son, he chose his own path. Became an artist of all things. Under the hegemony, he would have been another soldier, another enforcer. Now he creates beauty. It's more than I deserve. It's exactly what you deserve, Kara said firmly. What we all deserve. The right to grow, to change, to become more than what others decided we should be. Their conversation was interrupted by an alert on Kara's communicator. A new discovery in the outer systems. Ruins of a pre-hegemony civilization on a world that had been marked as uninhabitable. The expedition team, a mix of archaeologists from 12 species, was requesting her expertise. As she prepared to leave, Kara reflected on how much had changed. 10 years ago, she had been a solitary refugee, clutching her few possessions and expecting death. Now she led initiatives that spanned the galaxy, working with colleagues who had once been enemies, discovering wonders the hegemony had hidden or destroyed. The ruins, when she arrived weeks later, told a familiar story. Another civilization that had resisted the collective, been declared contaminated, and seemingly erased. But as the team carefully excavated, they found something remarkable. Underground vaults containing the species' entire cultural archive, protected by technologies the hegemony hadn't understood. They knew they couldn't win, the lead archaeologist explained, so they preserved what they could, hoping someone would find it after the hegemony fell. It was one of dozens of such discoveries in recent years. The hegemony's attempt to create a monoculture had failed not just because Earth resisted, but because the desire for freedom and identity ran too deep to ever be fully suppressed. On world after world, hidden archives were found. Underground resistance movements revealed, cultural practices that had survived in secret brought back to light. Earth's role in the new galactic order wasn't as a ruler, but as a facilitator. The planet's governments helped coordinate the massive effort of reconstruction. But always with the principle that each world must find its own path. Some former hegemony worlds chose democracy. Others developed new forms of governance that suited their species' unique psychology. The only universal requirement was freedom of thought. Trade flowed more freely than ever before. Without the hegemony's restrictive controls, innovation spread rapidly between worlds. Medical breakthroughs from one species saved lives among others. Agricultural techniques developed on harsh worlds helped feed populations on more temperate ones. Art and culture experienced a renaissance as creators drew inspiration from across the galaxy. But it wasn't without challenges. Some former collective members struggled with freedom, finding the burden of choice overwhelming after generations of having every decision made for them. Mental health facilities staffed by counselors from species that had long valued individual thought worked tirelessly to help these beings adapt. There were also those who yearned for the old ways. Small groups attempted to recreate the collective consciousness, believing that unity of thought was worth the loss of individuality. Earth's response was consistent with its principles. As long as participation was truly voluntary and individuals remained free to leave, these communities were allowed to exist. Most dissolved within a few years, as members rediscovered the joy of independent thought. The transformation was perhaps most visible in the next generation. Children born after the fall of the hegemony grew up in a galaxy where diversity was celebrated. Schools on every world taught multiple languages. Cultural exchanges were common, and young beings thought nothing of having friends from different species. Kara witnessed this firsthand when she returned to Earth for the memorial's first anniversary. A group of youngsters was playing in the plaza. Human, Zealothi, Krellian, Vorthan, and others inventing a game that combined elements from each of their cultures. Their laughter echoed off the memorial walls, a sound that would have been impossible under the hegemony's rule. One child, noticing her watching, ran over. "Are you really Dr. Velsoren? The one who helped free everyone?" "I was just one of many," Kara replied, but the child wasn't satisfied with modesty. "My teacher says you were on the first refugee ship, and now you help find all the hidden cultures. Will you tell us about it?" Soon she was surrounded by eager young faces, all wanting to hear about the time before they were born. As Kara told her story, carefully edited for young ears, she realized these children would never fully understand what the galaxy had been like. To them, diversity was natural, freedom was assumed, and the idea that someone would be punished for thinking differently was as alien as the hegemony had once considered independent thought. That evening, Earth's leadership gathered for a quiet celebration. President Chun had invited the original architects of Earth's refugee program, those who had first suggested opening the planet to the galaxy's unwanted. Many were elderly now, but their eyes shone with satisfaction at what their compassion had achieved. "Did you ever imagine it would lead to this?" someone asked the eldest, a human whose own grandparents had been refugees on Earth centuries before. "Honestly? No," she admitted. "We just knew it was the right thing to do. One ship at a time, one life at a time. We couldn't save everyone, but we could save someone. And it turned out those someone saved us all." The gathering included former hegemony officials who had helped dismantle the system from within during the transition. One, a former conditioning specialist, had spent the decade developing techniques to enhance individual creativity rather than suppress it. Another had converted hegemony surveillance technology into early warning systems for natural disasters, saving countless lives. As the evening progressed, plans were discussed for the future. The galaxy was stable now, but there was so much work still to be done. Lost colonies to reconnect with, damaged ecosystems to restore, traumatized populations to heal. Earth would continue to play a central role, not as a commander, but as a coordinator, helping worlds help themselves. Kara found herself on the memorial's observation deck as the celebration continued below. The stars above held no more fear for her. Each point of light was a world full of possibility, a civilization free to chart its own course. Somewhere among them was Zealoth Prime, slowly recovering from the damage the hegemony had inflicted. She had returned there once, helping establish schools that taught young Zealothi to think for themselves. It wasn't home anymore. Earth held that place in her hearts now, but it was healing. Credit for your thoughts? Admiral Altran joined her, using the old Earth expression he had learned from human colleagues. Just remembering, Kara said, that terrified refugee who arrived here, convinced she was going to die. If she could see me now, she'd be proud. Altran finished. We all would. Those scared, desperate beings huddled in cargo holds, certain they were being sent to their doom. Instead, we found hope. They stood in comfortable silence, two former enemies who had become friends, looking out at a galaxy transformed by the simple act of opening arms to the unwanted. A young aide approached with a datapad. Director Velsorin, we've received another signal. A deep space probe has found what might be refugees from the hegemony's early expansion, species we thought were extinct. They've been hiding in an asteroid field for 300 years. Kara smiled, taking the pad. The work was never done. Somewhere in the galaxy, beings still hid in fear, unaware that the regime that had driven them into darkness had fallen. But Earth's message continued to spread, carried by those who had been saved. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. You are welcome here. Prepare a rescue mission, she instructed. Full diplomatic and medical support. And make sure to include members of the Freedom Generation. Let these refugees see what their sacrifice helped preserve. As the aide hurried off, Kara turned back to the stars. Each rescue, each recovered culture, each mind freed from fear added another facet to the beautiful, chaotic, diverse civilization the galaxy had become. The hegemony had tried to create perfection through conformity, never understanding that true strength came from infinite variations working in harmony. Earth had taught the galaxy that lesson, not through conquest or coercion, but through the most powerful force in any civilization, compassion. The small blue world that had opened its arms to the Banished had, in doing so, embraced the future. And what a future it was! Messy, complicated, sometimes difficult, but alive with possibility in a way the sterile unity of the collective could never have been. The memorial below stood as a reminder of the price of intolerance, but also as a beacon of hope. Every name carved in light represented not just a life saved, but a future made possible. To the Banished, Altran said, raising an imaginary glass and toast. To the Banished, Kara echoed, and to the world that welcomed them home. Above them, the stars shone on, each one a promise that somewhere in the vast galaxy, freedom would always find a way. And at the heart of it all, Earth continued its mission, arms ever open, ready to catch those who fell, and, in catching them, lift the entire galaxy to heights the hegemony could never have imagined. The story of the Banished had become the story of the free, and it was far from over.